I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. It's great to have you with us for this weekly omnibus news and analysis radio program. We're streaming out live on X, Rumble, YouTube, also BitChute, Facebook Live, and Odyssey as well. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We're going to have a very interesting conversation, and I want to direct you as well to up on the X platform. We had a space last night, which ran somewhat late. We had a very good panel, including Ryan Dawson and others, to discuss the topic at hand, and that is, does Donald Trump want a war with Iran? This is the big question everybody is looking for answers to, and we had a great discussion. You can find that on our X feed at 21Wire. If you just go to our feed there, you'll be able to listen to the recording of that. It was very well attended, but very important conversation. So this is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. There's other things that we want to cover as well. Later in the Overdrive segment, we'll be joined by some members of our team at Alternate Current Radio Network. I think Basil Valentine is also due to join us as well. And also, I want to point to our featured documentary this week. It's called The Weight of Chains. This is a fantastic independent documentary. It's about the forced breakup, I should say, the forced breakup of Yugoslavia. So very important documentary, which we're featuring. This is also sort of one of the anniversary dates of the NATO bombing and the destruction of this European country, Yugoslavia, where the EU and NATO forced to change borders of a country in an unprovoked attack on a sovereign member state of the United Nations, an unprovoked attack by NATO, a full-scale bombing by NATO. So it's very rich that they're lecturing the Russians over Ukraine on some of these issues, especially when it comes to recognizing Crimea. Let's not get into the debate about Kosovo and the merits of that fake state that's really, if you drill down to it, is just basically a beachhead for NATO in Europe, another beachhead right on the border of the Balkans there and facing Russia. So that's the point of that conflict. One of the discussions that's kind of quite heady right now, and of course we spoke about it at length last night on the X Spaces. I'm going to bring up on stage the tweet that's going to probably kick off this conversation. This is a statement by Scott Ritter, and Scott has been very outspoken about the prospects of nuclear war. So we'll bring that up on screen, Scott's tweet. What Iran should do, what we should be doing in terms of negotiations, what Iran should be doing specifically. This is what Scott Ritter is basically asking. I'll bring that up. That's my X feed there. Now, I did a quote tweet and responded to Scott on this. And, some people may take Scott's position on this, but he's also gotten a lot of pushback as well, because he's taken quite a hard position on this issue. So that's my quote tweet. I'll talk about that in a moment. But here's basically Scott Ritter. And basically he's saying, in no uncertain terms, he's talking about national sovereignty, free will, and so forth. So he's saying Iran has taken itself down a path where its nuclear program can be rightly characterized as being one short step from becoming a nuclear weapons program. Okay. And unless steps are taken to reverse this, Iran is at a risk of being assessed by the United States as representing an existential threat both to the U.S. and its regional allies. When we say regional allies, let's just cut to the chase. He's talking about Israel. Of course, he's not naming Israel in his tweet, probably because he doesn't want to add another layer of tar to the conversation that unfortunately everything sticks to. This is the problem with Israel in this conversation. But anyway, nonetheless, Scott's claiming that the potential of an Iranian nuclear weapons program is a threat to the U.S., that Iran has an opportunity to avoid the destruction of its nation and regime change. That's basically what the warning is here from Ritter. Iran has the opportunity to avoid this outcome by putting its nuclear program on the negotiation table. Now, Is he talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear energy? It's all very vague. I suppose he's talking about nuclear weapons. Okay. The problem with this conversation is, and Scott Ritter's saying this is a regime change and nation killing action on the part of the Iranians. Okay. So that's what Ritter is saying. So the problem with this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is that what nuclear weapons program? Okay. And this is my response to Scott, which you can read up there on screen. But my question is, what nuclear weapons program? Where is the evidence that Iran is basically running a nuclear weapons program? And again, we discussed this on the space last night at length, 2 hours and a half. Great discussion with panelists as well. But again, where is the evidence for this nuclear weapons program? That's the problem with this conversation. It's been the problem all along with this conversation. So as Scott Ritter saying, even the mere threat that Iran is passing the nuclear threshold, that constitutes some level of justification. Obviously, Scott's taking a hyper-realist, maximalist, realist, offensive realist position on this. Basically, might makes right. And the U.S. is the most powerful country with the most powerful nuclear arsenal on the planet, or tied with Russia in that respect. And therefore, if they feel threatened, then they're going to act. And there's nothing you can do about it. Submit to the U.S. and come to do a nuclear deal, as Donald Trump is demanding of the Iranians. Otherwise, we're going to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against your facilities. And that's basically what the U.S. is saying there. Okay. So there's a number of problems with this. There's a number of problems, and I'll go down the list. Okay. First of all, the potential for a nuclear weapons program. So there's no evidence, even according to the United States intelligence assessment, even the most recent statement by the director of national intelligence in the United States, Tulsi Gabbard, who was on this Signal Gate, okay? The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. So even she says there's no evidence, according to the U.S. intelligence assessment, that Iran has a nuclear weapons program, okay? Even Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, says this, okay? So if it's about a country that has the potential to have nuclear weapons, in other words, a country that has a civilian nuclear industry, but doesn't have an active nuclear weapons development program, but could develop a nuclear weapon derived from their potential they have with their civilian program. So by this logic, then any country that has a civilian nuclear industry can potentially have nukes, or could potentially be secretly developing them. So we have 10 countries that we also need to attack who could potentially have nuclear weapons. This is one of the first points of failure on this argument. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, of all people, and I'm not saying this as a hard criticism of Scott Ritter. I think he's a great analyst and a great asset to these types of conversations. But I am a little bit surprised that him being the weapons inspector isn't leading with the part of the conversation of, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapons program? Where is it? So at this point, we have a rerun of the Iraq War, the run up to the Iraq War. We have a weapons of mass destruction accusation and no evidence. Okay. So at the very bare minimum, shouldn't we, I mean, do you see the problem here? So Iran somehow has to convince the U.S. that they're not going to produce nuclear weapons and there's going to be oversight. Well, they already did that. It's called the JCPOA. And this president, Donald Trump, in his first term, yanked their rug out from under it in May of 2018 with his stooge at the time, the Israeli stooge named Mike Pompeo, who was masquerading as Secretary of State at the time, that person was acting on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu, taking his orders from Tel Aviv. And they managed to strong arm and convince Trump that they needed to tear up the deal. And then Trump went on TV and said, it's a terrible deal. This is a terrible deal. We need to get out of this deal. So Trump didn't even know it was in the deal. I doubt he read it. I doubt he understood it. If he did, any reasonable person wouldn't have taken such an action. Because what he did was basically put the region on course for a huge escalation in tensions. And now he's back in his second term, and he wants to somehow do it again or bring Obama's deal back, put his Trump stamp on it, and then somehow this is going to work. Now, this is all well and good if you're not negotiating with anybody, if there's no counterparty. Unfortunately for Trump, there is a counterparty, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Why would, and again, this takes some skill, you have to put yourself and have the vantage point of the counterparty across the table. Why would the Iranians want to do another JCPOA deal with Donald Trump, who they regard as a bad faith actor? And they have a right to regard him as that because he did tear up the last deal. That was a deal that took years to put together with the P5+1. You had all of the European countries. You had Russia. You had the EU. You had everybody on board and the US delegation to glue that thing together. And it was agreed on. And it was working. But a propaganda campaign was launched by the Israelis, Fox News, and the Republican neocon wing of the Republican Party, that this was a terrible deal and it's going to allow Iran to get the bomb in 10 years. It was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. High octane BS, basically. But good enough to fool the stupid people who believe this sort of propaganda. And that's history, unfortunately. So why would the Iranians want to sign a deal with Trump that could be undone by the next administration in America in 3 or 4 years? Why? And especially when it's Trump who tore up the last one. Are they going to get a better deal with Trump, or is it going to be a worse deal? Is this any guarantee that they're going to be attacked? Because look at the record of the U.S. The last time there was a WMD threat in the Middle East that the U.S. was taking and managing, Iraq allowed the inspectors in. They did the inspections. Scott Ritter himself involved in that whole process. No weapons of mass destruction, no chemical weapons. So Iraq complied with the, quote, U.S. international community, United States, and the G7, the international community. Iraq, Saddam Hussein complied, and they bombed him into the Stone Age, invaded, occupied, and killed 1.5 million people anyway. So the U.S. record is very poor. With Iraq, they basically bamboozled Iraq into a trap that turned out to be a disaster, not only for Iraq, but for the region. And they did so on behalf of the state of Israel. That's where that policy originates. We can go right back to the 1990s Project for New American Century, the Clean Break document, the words of Benjamin Netanyahu himself browbeating our Congress in the mid-1990s, saying we need to take out Saddam Hussein. I think he did it multiple times in the 90s and 2000s. We need to take out Saddam Hussein, then democracy will flourish in the region. Same with Libya. Look what happened there. Same with Syria, etc. Now Iran. They want Iran. Israel wants Iran, and Trump is their man. So the question is the United States going to be reckless enough to launch a preemptive strike, a preemptive nuclear strike against Iran, which is more or less what's being threatened? or back Israel as they strike Iran, which will the U.S. will be fully involved in every aspect of that operation, even if they're not flying the F-35s. Or are they going to strike Iran in tandem together, a joint operation? Now, a lot of people simping for Trump and MAGA online are bloviating at the moment, like, oh, there's not going to be an attack in Iran, and this is all 5D chess. Trump is just escalating to de-escalate. It's all going to be fine. QAnon said it's all going to be good. Trust the plan. Trust the plan. Okay, if you fall in that category, okay, why bother? Why even bother? Why bother getting up in the morning? Because QAnon has your life figured out for you. Just wait for the drops. You don't have to think. You can switch the brain off. Forget about your education, critical thinking capacity. QAnon will take care of all that for you. Imagine QAnon in a QAnon AI engine. I can't wait for it. So Scott Ritter is basically saying that's what has to happen. And my response to that is threefold. Three important points. One is, of course, what we just mentioned. Where's the evidence of this nuclear weapons program? That's number one. And again, we don't have it. We don't have it. Oh, but there's reports from the IAEA. We have radioactive signatures here and there, whatever. That's not evidence. Okay. It's data. Show me the weapons. Well, you can't. Are you going to send in the inspectors? Well, the U.S. already burned that card. Twice. Okay. That's their fault. It's Washington's fault. And it's Israel's fault for goading them to sabotage their own deals. Yeah. That's the problem when you have a foreign country running your foreign policy, is that you do things like this and they have historical implications. So Israel, unfortunately, the legacy of the tight relationship the U.S. has with the state of Israel, where Israel's dictating U.S. foreign policy, these are the type of problems, legacy issues that come along with that. Okay, it's a disaster. But anyway, we'll go on. So even if there was a nuclear Iran, even if they had a nuclear weapon, it wouldn't be a threat to the United States. No more than they would be than Pakistan is a threat to the United States, or India is a threat to the U.S. Both nuclear armed states. No, there's only one country in the region that would perceive a nuclear Iran, as a threat, and that's the state of Israel. That's it. The Arab countries do not view Iran as a threat unless a war breaks out and they get dragged into it because they're hosting U.S. forces on their bases in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. There's even, I think, facilities in Oman. They could be targeted. In Syria, there's a total of, I think, 20 facilities in northeastern Syria, all illegal, U.S. bases and facilities of different sorts. 2 bases in Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan, Turkey, Cyprus, Egypt, 2 in Israel, plus Djibouti and the illegal occupation of Socotra, along with the UAE. They're everywhere. Diego Garcia, a few thousand miles south in the Indian Ocean. They're everywhere. Okay. So the United States, if they're instigating an attack in Iran, they should expect there's going to be a response. So inherently, though, a nuclear Iran is not a threat to the U.S. It's only a threat to Israel. So if the U.S. strikes Iran and preemptively with tactical nuke bunker busters, okay, they're not doing that for U.S. national security. They are explicitly doing that on behalf of one country, Israel. which is also a country that is currently in the International Courts of Justice on trial for genocide of the native Palestinian population. That's who the United States is backing 100% in the region. Their prime minister is an arrest warrant with the ICC for Benjamin Netanyahu and the former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Okay, that's who the U.S., that's their interests, are these war criminals and genocidal maniacs running an apartheid state in the Middle East, and there's specific, explicit policy of ethnically cleansing the people who lived there before they arrived and formed their state by force in 1948. And people say, oh, there was a UN partition. There wasn't. It wasn't. What was agreed upon by that first UN resolution was never implemented. And after that, you had the Nakba, and here we are today in 2025, still trying to iron out this horrific problem. Nonetheless, that's what it's about. Okay, Saudi and Iran don't really have any inherent issues. They do have a type of a rapprochement at the moment, but the U.S. and Israel are trying to exacerbate that by bombing Yemen and trying to create more division, painting Yemen as a proxy of the Iranians. Utterly ridiculous. They're not a proxy. Yemen is or Ansar Allah, or aka the Houthis. They have absolute agency on the Arabian Peninsula, and Saudi knows that. So back to the question. So the final point is, and maybe this is the most important point in all of this discussion. So we have bad form by the U.S. And what this comes down to isn't necessarily the overwhelming force of the United States of America. And as Scott Ritter would say, Iran must comply, or the U.S. is going to take out their government, their regime, and then destroy their nation, basically. Because there's a suspicion that they have nuclear weapons. And the U.S. is doing this explicitly on behalf of the state of Israel, who's wanted for war crimes. Okay, that's the frame that we're in. That's the frame. Okay. And we had a nuclear deal that was transparent, that had multiple international guarantors, that the U.S. itself signed on to, the Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration, arguably one of the more useful things that Obama did while in 2 terms as U.S. president. There weren't many, but that's one of them. Trump tore it up on the orders of Israel. So we have a problem. Iran has no reason to enter into agreement with a country that is not agreement capable, the United States of America. The U.S. did the same thing. The record's even worse. They signed UN Security Council Resolution 2202 for the implementation, more or less, of the Minsk peace process with Russia and Ukraine. And the U.S. and its allies, the French specifically, who are a guarantor of that, they let it lapse, they sabotaged it, and then we got a war in Ukraine. That didn't have to happen. If those parties who had the agreement would have followed through with their obligations rather than sabotage their own agreement, just like Donald Trump has just sabotaged a ceasefire agreement, which he took credit for just a month and a bit ago, coming into office to great fanfare 2 months ago. A ceasefire in Gaza, took all the credit for it, and Israel just tore it up, threw it in the bin 2 weeks ago, and blocked food, water, and medical aid into Gaza, and has been basically assassinating journalists, medical aid workers, killing Palestinians by the hundreds. Okay, no more ceasefire agreement. The U.S. gave Israel the green light to sabotage it and resume the war, not just in Gaza, but also sabotage the ceasefire with Lebanon. So Israel's been allowed to do these things by the Trump administration. So the Russians are looking at the U.S. saying they're not agreement capable with the JCPOA, which Russia signed, the Iran nuclear deal, plus Resolution 2202 with Ukraine. The U.S. destroyed that as well. So Iran, Russia, China, these other countries are looking at the U.S. saying, can we trust the United States? The record is horrible. The results are even worse. Wars. And then the U.S. has the gumption to go and carpet bomb Yemen, the poorest country in the world, because they were basically demanding that Israel stop genociding the Palestinians who were under an illegal occupation. And before Yemen even responded to Israel breaking the ceasefire agreement, the U.S. went in for a preemptive carpet bombing operation, killing Yemeni civilians, guaranteeing that Yemen's going to be at war with the U.S. and that probably there's going to be a disruption in shipping because of what the United States just did. The shipping was flowing during the ceasefire. Does it take, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a brilliant applied engineer like Elon Musk to figure this out. But apparently, we have a problem in our national security committee in America with people like this that don't have a clue what they're doing. They don't understand half of what we're saying here. So I will drop the final question. So they're demanding, the U.S. is saying, Scott Ritter and everybody else, all the realist pundits, Iran needs to comply because they're the only one who's a nuclear threat in the region. No, they're not. Why should Iran comply with nuclear inspections or the non-proliferation treaty requirements or obligations? Why should they have to do that with no proof that they even have weapons, when the other side of the table, the real party in this, Israel, has nuclear weapons, has 200 to 300 nuclear warheads, and who refuses to allow anybody to inspect or to look or to check on anything they're doing, and have done so since the 1960s, since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Interesting. Kennedy didn't like the fact that Israel was developing secret nuclear power and nuclear weapons. He didn't like that. He was pushing back against it. And we all know what happened. Are those two things linked? I believe they are. I believe there's plenty of evidence in the JFK files which alludes to that. You see, this is the core of the problem in the Middle East, that the U.S. and its allies are accusing Iran of threatening the region with the potential of a nuclear weapons program, but no evidence, while the state of Israel is blackmailing not just the region, but the world with an undeclared secret nuclear weapons program. And this is allowed to happen. So none of this makes sense. Until you can resolve these three issues I brought up, then what Scott Ritter's proposing and others, that Iran must bend over and comply to the diktats of the West, doesn't make even remote sense to anybody else in the world outside of your little foreign policy bubble or theoretical bubble. Okay, basic game theory suggests basic game theory, negotiations theory, because that's what's going to decide any agreement or treaty in the end. It's politics. It's politics. Basic game theory, if you're threatening the other side with a future attack, or you have, or it's probable that you will attack them in the future, even if they comply, which all those boxes are ticked when looking at the US against Iran, then the party that you're pressuring or you're sanctioning or you're threatening or demanding they comply with some action, they will not comply 99 times out of 100, because it's that threat of force or future threat of force or punishment that basically takes away any incentive for a change in behavior, whatever that behavior that you want. So it's not going to work with the Iranians. They might engage in some kind of a process just to buy time and see what happens, and maybe try to build a coalition against this. But fundamentally, it's not going to work. So I propose a solution. If we want to avoid World War III, how about this? How about we have a JCPOA, bring it back, bring the guarantors back. With Iran, has to come and have inspections, and just like before, full transparency. Iran. The other subject of the JCPOA, the new JCPOA, is the state of Israel. Must submit to full inspections, full transparency of their nuclear weapons program, and to disarm their nuclear warheads. That way we have no belligerent nuclear powers in the Middle East. Is that fair? Because you can't impose this on Iran and not on Israel, and just say, oh, Israel doesn't exist, we're just going to talk about Iran, because then Israel can blackmail the whole region continually, as they've been doing. This is the source of all the problems in the Middle East and geopolitically globally. You have one tiny little rogue state that's holding everybody else hostage with a nuclear arsenal that nobody's pressuring them to comply, to come clean on. This is completely insane. That's the source of the problem here. And this is ultimately the source of the Iranian complaint. The West are not listening to Iran. But if they listen close enough, they will hear this. It's a double standard. Therefore, it cannot work. There cannot be any agreements. Therefore, you end up with everybody on war footing. And you can't threaten to destroy countries like the U.S. is doing, threatening Iran, with Israel standing behind it. Okay? This is why it's not going to work. You want a nuclear deal? You want inspections? Israel has to pony up on the same level as Iran. And then the United States and the international community need to basically take the nuclear weapons away from the state of Israel. And then we have a denuclearized Middle East. Otherwise, if Israel's allowed to have them, then what's fair is Iran is allowed to have them as well. And they'll cancel each other out in the same way that India and Pakistan do. That's fair. We're either going to do this with reciprocity, or it's going to end in tears for everybody. And the United States has to basically man up, stop playing games, and stop being a dog on a leash of Tel Aviv. Because this is just not going anywhere productive at the moment. It's just not. We could go further on this, but we're going to take a break, and we'll be back. We'll be talking to our team as well after the break, and we'll continue this discussion. We'll also cover Signalgate as well, and we'll probably do another program on this in not so long, maybe during the week. But anyway, I'm Patrick Henningsen. This is the Sunday Wire, episode 541 of this weekly Omnibus News and Analysis radio program, brought to you here at 21stcenturywire.com, also alternatecurrentradio.com.